Crimean Tatar leader Ilmi Umerov, sentenced to 2 years in a penal colony because of his opposition to Russia's annexation of his homeland, said Wednesday he will appeal his conviction, even if it is a hopeless cause. Speaking to VOA Russian reporter Danila Galperovich just after a court in Simferopol pronounced the sentence, Umerov said he had no illusions that there was any chance of overturning the verdict against him. Everything in this case, from opening a probe into it to ending it with the sentence, is an absolute hoax, Umerov said during a telephone interview from Crimea. Even prior to opening a probe into this, they started falsifying evidence, manipulating transactions and ascribing to me statements I never made. Poor health and harsh sentence. Umerov was charged with public calls for separatism, which was outlawed in Crimea after Russia annexed the Ukrainian territory. While in detention, he was forced to undergo a compulsory psychiatric examination. The sentence he received, 2 years in a penal colony, is considered a dangerous burden for a 60-year-old man who suffers from Parkinson's disease and diabetes. The deputy chairman of the Crimean Tatars' Mejlis, the community's representative body, said he believed his harsh sentence was handed down in reaction to a United Nations report this week that noted a sharp deterioration in human rights in Crimea since Russia annexed the Ukrainian peninsula on the Black Sea in March 2014. If I say that they are punishing me for my opinion, for my position, then it would be a little trite, said Umerov, who has been vocal and outspoken in his opposition to Russia's occupation of Crimea. In general, I think this is a reaction to the document that was adopted 2 days ago at the UN General Assembly on the situation with human rights in Crimea. It mentions many crimes that this occupation regime in Crimea is committing. The report he cited, released Monday by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, recounted arbitrary arrests and detention, enforced disappearances, torture and ill treatment with no accountability since Russia asserted control over Crimea. Ukraine crisis. Russia's seizure of its neighbor's territory and its ongoing military support for separatists in eastern Ukraine has triggered the biggest crisis between the Kremlin and the West since the end of the Cold War. Western sanctions have been imposed on Russia ever since. Crimea's inviolable borders have been accepted in the world and by agreements between the two countries, Ukraine and Russia, Umerov told VOA. Russia, through its act of aggression, by annexing a part of the Ukrainian territory, violated its own law in the first place. And this must not remain unpunished. Rights groups have condemned Umerov's treatment, conviction, and sentence. Latest case of rights violations. Amnesty International said Umerov's case was the latest encroachment on fundamental rights and freedoms on the Crimean Peninsula and should be immediately cancelled. The sentence of 60-year-old Ilmi Umerov, who suffers from Parkinson's disease, demonstrates yet another stage of the continuing persecution by the de facto authorities of the peninsula, said Oksana Pakalchik, director of Amnesty's Ukrainian branch. The decision to deprive him of his freedom, she said, is typical of the politically motivated trials, arbitrary arrests and intimidation of critics by Russian authorities in Crimea. This is a clear violation of freedom of speech. Umerov's daughter, Umerova, predicted opposition to the Russian authorities' verdict will grow. I think that the reaction will continue to grow like a snowball, she told VOA Russian reporter Taras Bernos, for the sake of her father's fragile health. The Russian system has once again surpassed itself, Umerova said.